Welcome once again. Today, I've been asked to talk about the coronavirus and its impact on Africa. That's a rather contentious topic at the moment, and I think we should give it a little bit more time before we put a video out talking about coronavirus, but we will get to that eventually. So with that in mind, I did come across a very interesting article on Quartz. For those not familiar with it, it's a global news service, and it does some excellent coverage of Africa. The article I came across is by a gentleman named Yomi Kazim, and Yomi Kazim writes an article entitled WhatsApp is so popular in Africa, even knockoff versions are used more often than Facebook. Now, in the interest of full disclosure, WhatsApp is no longer a standalone company. It now belongs to Facebook, who purchased it in the recent past. So what are we talking about? Well, we're talking about what are known as WhatsApp mods, or modifications on the existing application that WhatsApp produces by third-party developers. So what do these things do, and why would people use them? Well, as Yomi Kazim has told us in his article, some of the advantages of it are that WhatsApp itself is a very simple, limited functionality application, and that's intentional. The designers of WhatsApp did that so that it could be used ubiquitously and made it far simpler to run the application on different operating systems and use it in different fashions. So third-party developers have developed their own applications which mimic or mirror or give the impression in some cases they are actually WhatsApp when they're not. So among these, you'll see something known as GB WhatsApp. It's the most widely used WhatsApp modification application out there. In fact, it's so popular that it's the second most used social media app in all of Africa. It even beats Facebook's app, which is fascinating in of itself. So why might people use these, as I asked before? So let me quote Brian Pond, who's the co-founder of Caribou Data. And he says they're obviously a big draw for a lot of people because you can do a lot of things with them that you can't do with WhatsApp. Such as, well, with GB WhatsApp, you can use multiple accounts, which is something that frustrates a lot of people, being able to only use one account. But with GB WhatsApp, you can actually have multiple accounts. You can restore deleted messages, and this is of great interest. You can actually take advantage of much larger file transfers. So for instance, you are capped at 16 megabytes to transfer a video or a large file on WhatsApp itself. But on GB WhatsApp, that goes up to 50 megabytes. That in itself is very desirable. But there's drawbacks to using this. For instance, WhatsApp itself says that the use of these applications violate its terms of service and infringes on their own intellectual property, which is going to be the theme of this after we finish this discussion here about these WhatsApp mods. And WhatsApp, should they discover that you're using one of these mods, can ban you and prevent you from using the actual original application. So what would you lose if you lose WhatsApp? Well, you would lose their signature end-to-end encryption on messages, which protects your data and protects your conversation from prying eyes. That is not available on these other applications. And so you do sacrifice something if you give up WhatsApp or if they find out you're using one of these WhatsApp mods and ban you. But that is your choice, what you want to do. These applications are out there. And as I said, they have some advantages. But this interesting article from Yomi Kazim raises an interesting question, and that is specifically about intellectual property. So let's talk about intellectual property. Well, Article 4 of the African Continental Free Trade Agreement, which many Africans are very excited about, with good reason. Many Africans are very excited about this. Article 4 talks about, in Phase 2, which is going on now, negotiations in Phase 2, that intellectual property will be addressed. The draft legal text should be submitted, it's scheduled to be submitted at the January 2021 African Union Assembly session for adoption. So the legal text of how intellectual property is addressed under the terms of the Continental Free Trade Agreement, which is already in effect, will not come into place until January of next year, assuming that the parties agree on it. So I should mention why this is important. Why do we care about protecting intellectual property? Well, a couple of different examples come to mind, and I'll use those to talk about why protecting intellectual property is important. So a South African author named Aubrey du Plessis wrote this interesting article, which he addresses some of the issues I've been talking about for many years, and I'll talk specifically about three of those, but let me quote something that he says. Because we talk about international trade quite a bit in Africa, and the need for trade versus the need for aid. But du Plessis says international trade is about much more than moving goods across borders. innovation, creativity, and branding represent a large amount of the value that changes hands in international trade. Trade policy should enhance this value and facilitate the flow of knowledge-rich goods and services across Africa's borders. Well, one example of this would be WhatsApp. This is intellectual property. This is high value added creation to something. Simply code without the work that the people put in to make the app and the functionality and the system, the infrastructure put in place for it to work, people couldn't use it across Africa. Why does the social media app even matter? Well, for instance, in Zimbabwe in 2017, nearly half of all internet traffic was WhatsApp alone, just that application. That's phenomenal. That's just how useful that application has been for Zimbabweans, as one example. But let's talk about these three things that Duplessis mentioned here. So he mentioned innovation, creativity, and branding. Well, so when it comes to innovation, if you have no incentive to develop things, design things, so you have an opportunity to profit or improve your life or improve your company or improve your country, what's the incentive to do it if innovation is not protected? And we protect innovation through copyright, and we also protect it through trademarks. So, you see me here again with my Starbucks. Branding. This is a ubiquitous logo all over the United States, North America, a fair portion of Europe these days, and even in South Africa, and likely expand elsewhere. This is the Starbucks logo. It's been modified over the years, but this is the current logo. And that's an example of branding. Companies spend a great deal of their money and effort being innovative, coming up with new things, designing things, being creative, and branding them. It's another example of branding. M&Ms. Folks around the world know what M&Ms are. We didn't know that brand simply because it appeared one day. We know it, and it's in our heads because of successful branding and marketing of this brand to the tune of probably billions of dollars over decades. M&Ms. This may be less well-known throughout Africa, but here in the United States, Chips Ahoy is a well-named brand of cookies, which people spend a lot of money on. And that is a bag that people could recognize from across the shop, most likely. Now, for folks in Africa, this is a brand you probably recognize, more common. And for folks all over U.S. and North America and Europe, Haribo, the German gummy bears. Most Americans say gummy, but it's a gummy. I love their branding. Here it's in English, so it doesn't really make as much sense. But in German, it's Haribo macht Kinder froh und Erwachsene ebenso. Haribo makes children happy and adults as well. I say the same thing on here. But they spent a lot of time and effort branding and marketing this product and innovating to come up with something that the consumer will like. So trademarks. What about trademarks? Well, that's important. We need to protect trademarks. You can't have knockoff goods impersonating trademarks. And here's a perfect example. Known the world over, the ubiquitous Coca-Cola script. You can recognize this can from a great distance anywhere in the world. Coca-Cola is that well known because of their branding. And because their brand is protected, their trademark is protected. Coca-Cola goes to great effort to protect that brand, to stop knockoffs, to stop piracy, to stop counterfeiting, so that their product is well known and it's protected, so they can profit from it. So a lack of IP protection by governments or courts who are unwilling or incapable of protecting intellectual property or copyrights and trademarks is a major hindrance to the developing world, and especially to Africa. Now, this comes to mind for me in two particular cases. I remember a couple decades ago, my first trip to Ghana. I was astounded by the amazing music scene there. Phenomenal musicians, fantastic music. And I thought to myself, why don't I know about this in the United States? Why have I never heard this music in Europe? These particular artists. I'd heard this genre, but not these artists. Well, some people say, well, that's because Africa doesn't matter. It's racism. People won't do it. Well, I don't really think that's the issue. The real issue here is that the artists themselves don't become known in large measure because when they perform, people record their performances and then they produce CDs, at the time cassettes, and before the 8 tracks, but then CDs, and now MP3s of their music, and they sell it. And none of that profit goes to the originator, the person who had the creativity to come up with the song. And this is a major problem. Hence, the music industry in West Africa is not something that generates huge wealth. So who are the huge West African musicians? I'm sure people in West Africa can tell us, but I don't know any of them. And if you're an American, don't tell me Akon, because he's not a West African. His parents came from the region. He's very devoted to West Africa, but he's not an African. He's an American. So Akon doesn't count. So these musicians are cheated of their intellectual property that's not protected by copyright. There aren't courts enforcing, arresting people for using selling counterfeit music, or tracking down or pursuing these cases to protect these musicians. Consequently, they don't make money off of this. They only make money from local performances or concerts and things like that. It's very disheartening. And it has been a major break and a way to arrest the development of that particular industry in West Africa. So protecting intellectual property and copyrights is also important for other reasons. As Aubrey Duplessis mentioned here, the innovation, creativity, and the branding are things that add value to products. I can't tell you the thousands of times I've heard people in West Africa complain about how the Europeans and Americans make all the money off their cocoa and they're being cheated and it's not fair. Well, my counter argument to that is that the cocoa is a commodity that's sold in global markets, and demand is what drives the price up or down. So people who have seen the cocoa and purchased it abroad, outside of West Africa, outside, for instance, Cote d'Ivoire or Ghana, where much of it is grown, they purchase it, say, in Switzerland. They ship it in. They combine it with sugar and with dairy, with milk, and they develop chocolate. And they brand that chocolate. And they market that chocolate. And so today we have things like Toblerone, which are very, very large chocolate enterprises. The Belgians are famous for their own chocolate. Of course, cocoa doesn't grow in Europe. It grows in Africa, primarily. That's where the markets are coming from. That's where the source is coming from. So why can Africans not profit from this? Well, there is chocolate produced in West Africa, but it's not marketed particularly well. It's not branded. People don't know about it. I can tell you Toblerone, I can tell you Ritter Sport, I can mention Hershey, Mars, lots of other chocolate brands, not all of them particularly tasty, but many of them. Some of them sell quite well simply because of excellent marketing, not because they taste particularly well. I'll give the exception of Toblerone and Ritter Sport taste quite good, and so it's not simply marketing for them. But these are the parts of the value chain that take you from a low base up to a higher point, and that's how you make money. That's how you make real money. You get larger margins as you go up the value chain. When you're simply selling commodities, you don't make that money. You make a minimum level, and your minimal level of money, and you are subject to the whims or the vagaries of the market. When demand goes up, prices go up. When demand goes down, prices go down. And for a lot of African countries that become so heavily dependent on trade with China, this is a particular problem. When China's economy is booming, it can be salad days for commodities producers in Africa. But when China's economy is in contraction or declining or stagnant, this has a dramatic impact on many Africans' lives. So how do we fix that? Well, a robust scheme under the African Continental Free Trade Agreement that protects intellectual property, copyrights, and trademarks would go a long way to helping African entrepreneurs and African corporations take the things that are produced in Africa and add value to them, move up the value chain. For instance, cocoa becoming chocolate, hot chocolate, other products, things like that. Musicians and a music industry that grows because the musicians actually can profit from their intellectual creativity. So let's take a look at this again very quickly. This started with a discussion of an interesting article on courts from Yomi Kazim, and we talked about the WhatsApp mods. Difficult to see here today. And so does it even matter? As I mentioned, WhatsApp is a particularly important platform in Africa. For instance, in Zimbabwe in 2017, half of all internet traffic was simply from the WhatsApp app. That is astounding. I could never even fathom that, say, in Japan, the United Kingdom, the United States, or even South Africa, where it's also quite well used. The main third-party developer that's known in Africa, and it's widely used, even more so than the Facebook app in Africa, is GB WhatsApp, which allows for multiple accounts, larger file transfer, and also gives you additional privacy settings. So the issues here we've talked about are IP. I didn't really focus on security, but one of the challenges, I did mention the encryption that WhatsApp has, so that's an advantage. But beyond that, you are subject or possibly going to get malware because these third-party apps aren't as well protected. And also they're located off of sites that aren't verified and protected as Google does with its site. And so the last one here is that on this issue is that WhatsApp could ban you if they find out you're using these. And in an effort to protect their intellectual property, they may do that. So I don't know if anyone's happened to it. But where does this all come into play? Well, it comes into play with the African Continental Free Trade Agreement. And we're talking about specifically Article 4, which is currently in phase 2 negotiations, so that in January of next year, 2021, they're supposed to present the legal text for the portion that discusses how to protect intellectual property. So, why do we want to protect it? Here we are once again for the three things that Duplessis mentioned, and I mentioned for many years. Innovation, creativity, and branding are what add value to production for products people produce. And the examples I've talked about here are music and cocoa. So there you have it. An interesting article talking about WhatsApp and how do we go from WhatsApp to the African Continental Free Trade Agreement. Well, that's how we do it. We talk about how protecting people's creativity and their ideas can lead to yet more innovation and for profitability for the people who come up with this. And so with that, I thank you for your time. Hopefully you enjoyed this broadcast. If you like it, please give us a like. Feel free to put comments there. I will go in the comment section myself, and I'll put the link to both the article from Yomi Kazim, which is on courts. I'll get that link on there. So if you want to go read that article yourself, you can. And I'll also put the link on there to Aubrey Duplessis' blog post talking about these issues. If you like us, give us a like. You feel free to subscribe if you'd like the videos we're producing. We need feedback, and happily we'll discuss any topics that are of mutual interest. We'll make videos on those. So thank you for your time, and we'll see you next time. This has been a production of the Indaba Africa Group.